Now, here's Spectrum, the talk of Mercer and Audley.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us for Spectrum. Today, Friday, already short week for many because of the holiday. Celina's Law Director, George Moore, our special guest. George, good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Good afternoon.
Good to have you. I hope a lot of people locally, did, follow the advice a lot of us gave when we reminded people don't do anything foolish because, the judge is not in on Monday or whatever. We like to say that a lot on holiday weekends, don't we?
Yeah, it's especially true when when the day off is on a Friday or a Monday. Judges, they also take time off as well.
And that means one less day where somebody can find out what their bail is going to be. So I always say celebrate responsibly. And actually,
Yes.
I think around here, we never let one or two people say that that's how it goes. For the most part, I think people do celebrate responsibly.
Yes, I believe so.
Let's talk about, what's going on, in your office and your role. When you kind of look at this kind of first half of the year, I mean, how have things, been, for the law director? Obviously, cases you had, there's always some, but in general, what kind of year has it been?
It's been a very good and enjoyable year so far. We're halfway through. I'm in the last part of my third term as city attorney. I've been in the job since January of 2012, and it's been a very enjoyable 3 terms here, and I'm looking forward to a 4th term coming up. I handle the civil end for the city of Celina, as you know, and I also prosecute at the Celina Municipal Court, and I prosecute all the misdemeanors for all of Mercer County for the most part.
True, and with this being an election year for you, we haven't talked much about it though, because let's face it, there just isn't anyone else on the ballot, and when that tends to happen, we tend to focus on races that are contested. But certainly we acknowledge that amazingly, end of the 3rd term already.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, and I did primarily private practice, which included some criminal defense work for about 4 years before that as well.
Did you find too that when you moved to the other side, when you started prosecuting cases, that it did help that you know what it's like to be on the other side?
That was one of the, one of the things that really inspired me, encouraged me to want to flip sides, if you will, in the criminal justice system and be a prosecutor. I never have forgotten what it's like to go to the jail to see your client who has just been charged with something, and the law either says they can't post a bond until X, or the judge says they can't post a bond until X, and quite often it was, you have to meet with your attorney. And so, if it was back in that era for me, I might get a call right now that says, hey, can you please go to the jail by 4 o'clock today and see so and so. And every case that we have, the case files, we say these are people's lives in here. And so if somebody gets picked up for a shoplifting at Walmart or something like that, and they get arrested and taken out to the jail, and it was a dollar value where the judge says, we're not just going to let you post $225 bond here, and we hope you come back and see us. No, we're going to hold you here. Maybe that defendant was supposed to pick up the kids after work, and so now you've got the spouse calling and things like that, and the employer, and there's just, like I said, it's people's lives that we're dealing with, and I've never forgotten that human aspect as I'm reviewing cases, as I'm prosecuting them and making decisions regarding them.
True, and some people would obviously say, well, gosh, they wouldn't have had those problems if they didn't shoplift, which is true. But on the other hand, it's probably also a moment where we have to realize, okay, but this crime is not exactly murder either. I mean, let's be civil about that, right?
Sure. Our justice system has divided crimes. The really serious are felonies. The not quite as serious are misdemeanors. And I only handle the misdemeanors. And so the cases that I deal with, if you're convicted and your worst sentence, if you will, is the county jail. And the most that our court can sentence you to, the most a municipal court can sentence a individual to on a highest level misdemeanor is 180 days. And even if a person is sentenced on 10 misdemeanor ones, they can only be sentenced to an aggregate of a year and a half. I mean, a year and a half in the county jail is not a picnic, but the felony court can send you to prison, which is an entirely different system.
For sure, and I'm glad you mentioned that. As you stacked up a lot of charges and said a year and a half. Sometimes people get frustrated and say, "Is that all?" And then they'll kind of look at you, or maybe look at the judge and say, "You're not doing your job," or "Why are you so soft on crime?" And the reality is that's out of your hands to a point.
Correct. The most that, like I said, the most that a defendant could be sentenced to on a misdemeanor one is 180 days in jail and or a $1,000 fine. They could be put on probation, but so for example, if there's a fatal crash that occurs as a result of a misdemeanor traffic violation or the driver's negligence, which didn't necessarily rise to a traffic violation, and it causes the death of another, and there's no other aggravating factors. There's no intoxication. There's no, there's a laundry list, if you will, of factors that would enhance that. But if there is no other enhancers, that is a misdemeanor that is filed. And by far and away the most difficult thing I have ever dealt with as an attorney is dealing with these wrongful death automobile accident charges here, because there's so many emotions involved, and the justice system is just a very small portion of these people's lives right now, and nothing we can do can go back in time. And we have every reaction from, "I don't want this other driver charged, I forgive them," to, "What do you mean this is only a misdemeanor?" And at that point, it's a very difficult conversation to have, to say, as the prosecutor, this is the case that I have been given by law enforcement here. This set of facts falls under this statute. The legislature in Columbus has determined this set of facts is this crime, and it is this level of a crime, and I'm doing the best I can within the confines of the system in which I work. And it's misdemeanor, but it can be emotional. It can be very, very difficult.
Are there times also where the other families say, "We forgive them, we don't want any charges," and you have to explain to them that that's very noble of you, but again, under the law, we can't just walk away here?
Correct. There's a phrase that I've heard used up at court before, where sometimes it's like let's say it's a bar fight or something. Two guys get into it, and after the fact, they're both just like, "Well, I don't want anything done. It's fine," and the police often tell them, "Well, it's not exactly. It's the state of Ohio versus. It's not individual versus individual." And I've heard it described. It's a public prosecution, and like, I guess with that bar fight example, I try to take a look at cases like, what caused this to happen here, and I always want to know, what do the parties think about all of this? What are their wants and desires and their wishes? But it doesn't mean that that's what the state's going to do. We have to look at many factors, not just one of them, I guess.
Talking to Celina's law director, George Moore, she said you handle also misdemeanors, and then obviously minor misdemeanors. Somebody gets that dreaded speeding ticket. It happens, people didn't realize how fast they were going, and they did realize it when they saw those lights in their mirror. We've all been there a time or two or three, and I know in some cases, they may have felt that well, they weren't going that far over, or they didn't need to pull me over. And can they, or do they ever call you and say, hey, can we work this out? Can you give me a break? How does that work?
Yes, I handle traffic prosecution, throughout Mercer County, and I've heard it described as, for most of people, a speeding ticket is an inconvenience and otherwise just a story to tell. But to some folks who drive for a living, or they are, maybe they're close with points on their license to a suspension or something like that. I mean, it could be a change of their livelihood, a change of their livelihood, which would be a change of their life. And so I think I treat every case with equal importance that comes across my desk, whether it's one of those fatal crashes or whether it's one of these speeding ticket cases here, because again, this may have a huge, even lifelong impact on, let's say it's a CDL driver, a guy that drives a truck for a living, and he was passing a slower vehicle, and he just happened to, get in the crosshairs of the radar, so to speak, at that time. I'm certainly willing to, listen to what people have to say on any case, and you imagine the spectrum from, I agree I was speeding, but as opposed, all the way to the other end of, I wasn't speeding and I don't want to plead to anything, and that's fine. People are entitled to trials. I wasn't there as the prosecutor on the case, so I'm presenting the state's case, and the defense presents their side, and that's the judge's role, is to decide.
That's for sure. And sometimes, especially these days, there's more video evidence than there ever was, before, where somebody might say, hey, this person, we had this accident because this person blew a red light. Person says, no, I didn't. And then either somebody's dashboard quickly proves, oh, yes, you did. See, here it is.
Yes. Several stories come to mind with that. But one that comes to mind, this was several years ago, but there was a crash between a semi and a car here in Celina, and each driver said the other had the red light, and the semi driver had a dash cam. So we took a look at it, and there was a delay of signal, and for, I think it was a second to a second and a half, both lights, like it was both ways, were red. And that was at that moment that they both went through the intersection. So they both got red light citations based on that.
There you go. We settled the argument. You're both wrong, right?
You're both wrong. I had another case where there was a lady that was cited for improper entering of the intersection on a red light, and she said, I was in the intersection on a yellow and I was hit. And there was several witness statements that all said that it was the opposite of what she had said. And so she went and found a local business that had a surveillance of that intersection, of that scene. And she brought it into a pretrial where that's what we do, is we talk about the case. And she showed me this video, and it was in black and white, but you could see plain as day, she entered on the yellow, it turned red, the other car hit her, and apparently the witnesses heard the crash, looked over, and said, well, that's the color of the lights. But
they weren't wrong, yeah.
Right, they were right for the time that they looked over, but that wasn't when, it wasn't at that moment. And so I said, great work. Case, I moved to dismiss the case, costs were given, and I never forgot that. That was probably 8 to 10 years ago by now. And it just reminds me, like, these are real people, real lives, and we need to look at these cases.
I'm sure she said at that point, hey, you're not so bad, George. Thank you for dismissing the case, right?
Yeah, people, they do seem appreciative when I take the time to look at a case. I said on the way over here, on my way out the door, I'd said that at best I can make 50% of the people happy in the legal field, because there's always two parties to a situation, but and at best that's a pie in the sky number. But at least I believe if you give the case the attention it deserves, that you would want if it was state versus you in that case, and explain to people, here's where I'm coming from and here's why. At least they may not like it or agree with it, but I think they at least respect and understand where I'm coming from.
We're going to take a break, and we're going to talk more with Celina. Hey, we're back on Spectrum. George Morris here, Celina City Law Director, and we see you at council meetings. A lot of times all eyes on you. When a request is made, like, hey, can we do this? Other times you must interject and tell the council, wait a second, we need a motion. You can't just, vote on this. Somebody's got to bring it to the floor. And most of these meetings are fairly routine. Other times, once again, like you said, you have to inadvertently make people unhappy. It's not necessarily that you're taking a side. You're looking at the law, you're looking at the Constitution and saying, well, you can't stop this, or no, you can't do this, and you're just looking at the law. I would imagine, your chance to kind of explain to people that it's not about taking a side, it's just interpreting the law, so to speak.
Right. I've heard attorneys' jobs described as when we played board games as a child with the family, we were the ones who knew the rules or knew where to look in the rules. And the city council has its set of rules, and if you're familiar with Robert's Rules of Order and how to run a meeting, I mean, that's a basic framework for what I'm talking about. But we do have some specific things in there, and there's rules of decorum and how legislation's introduced, and how, where, and how often we hold our regular meetings, and how special meetings are called, and like public input, and just many things like that. And so sometimes I'm called upon to make a judgment call on, well, if we wanted to delay the vote on some piece of legislation because we want a different map, or we want to look into a contract provision, or we want to, for whatever reason, that's where I'd look through the rules and say, well, here's what I think the appropriate motion would be to make. But my job is legal counsel. I give the advice. I don't make the motion to do anything or whatever, but I see this, to my opinion, this would be the right way to go about doing this here. And we're of course bound by our city laws. State, federal laws also apply. You look at the letter of the law and also judicial interpretation thereof.
That's something that we probably need to think of the law not necessarily as cold, but not really personal either. The law's not going to look at a case saying, I don't like what you did, we're going to charge you with the crime. No, it's more like, well, here's the evidence, right? And so that supports these charges. I think it's a little different when you put it that way. Sure.
The criminal justice system is set up by crimes having elements to them. For example, assault, and this may not be an exact quote, but no person shall cause or attempt to cause physical harm to another. So if you go out and kick a dog is not another person, so that wouldn't violate that. It might be a violation of an animal cruelty type of statute there, because that would deal with, with, it would say no person shall do this to a dog or whatever. But yeah, it's almost like, what box, if you will, does the fact pattern fit into? And and that's when I'm reviewing criminal cases, that's what I'm looking for, is can the state meet the elements of whatever this is that I'm reviewing here. And then you also have to think that if it's a crime that a defendant could face a possibility of going to jail for, a loss of liberty, at that point they're entitled to a jury trial. And so, I've got to bear that in mind, like how much beyond a reasonable doubt to an average juror would this establishment of this element or this crime be? And then, I have to convince all 8 in the box. The defense has to have one defector, and then it's a defense win, if you will.
Yeah, I imagine in some cases it's easier to be the defense, right? You're trying to convince one person.
Yes. Each side has its challenges, I will say. Each side has its challenges because we each play a separate role in the justice system. And I was talking with a defense attorney just this week up at court, and they were filing a motion because they needed to do this for their client's benefit, and they were kind of saying, "Yeah, sorry, I'm creating extra work for you," and I just kind of laugh and I said, I've never forgotten what it's like to be on the other side of that table. I said, when I defended criminal cases, I looked at myself as a defender of the Constitution. And I still look at myself as a champion of the Constitution, especially because I'm trying to keep in mind the defense era of my life, that I was trying to analyze the case from the other end here.
One of the things I think a great way to end the program is, while I certainly know our system of justice is not perfect, I've said this before, it's way better than whatever's in second place. I have no interest in that. I like what we have.
Yes, one of my all-time favorite law enforcement officers says that this is the best criminal justice system in the world, despite its many flaws.
No question. Thanks again, George.
Thanks for having me.
If you missed any part of the show, I have it online at WCSMradio.com. We'll repeat the show at 1:30 over on Lake 100. Don't you go anywhere.